Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming out tonight. It is good, and it is great, actually, to be home here at St. Clement. I was actually arrived here as a deacon in 2009, and served here and got to know. I got my baby steps as a priest. You know, I took them here at St. Clement. All right, this is not going to work. All right, there it is. With you, St. Clement parishioners, I learned how to bless. With you, I learned about love and that sight with which you came to my office. You know, with that little glaring in your eyes when you said, I love this man and I want to marry him, Father. When you preside at our wedding. With you, I learned how to baptize. With you, I learned how to forgive sins. With you, I learned about the human condition and about the uniqueness of each one of us, and also the beauty of difference between us. And so it is an honor to be back, to come to be with you as we explore this great topic, which is the topic of mercy. I'd like to thank Christina and all of the members of the committee, which, you know, this is, I got to tell you, in the entire Archdiocese, this is one of the hottest theology on taps, one of the hottest gigs to be at. So I got to tell you, it's quite an honor, you know. But someone did say that no one's a prophet in their own land, so I got to keep that in mind. All right. I want you to think for 1 second. What does it mean for you, deeply, really? The simplest prayer that we all repeat Sunday after Sunday. Theologians tell us, so I'm going to use a little theology because it is theology on tap. Theologians tell us, and biblical scholars tell us, that there's 7 petitions within this simple prayer. And one of them, perhaps the one that just gnaws within me, is when we as a community of faith stand within the liturgy and say to God the Father, Father, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. To be honest with you, I am not really sure that I really want to mean that every time that I say that on Sunday. Because I'm not really sure that I want God to forgive me in the same measure with which I forgive others. Because it's really hard, you know, and I'm Latino and we hold grudges, you know, and so it's very, very difficult to forgive, especially those who have hurt us. And if life is real, and if life is general, then we know that we are hurt, and that we hurt those whom we love the most. If you think about it, people that you really don't care about and they do something to you, But it is the pains that we carry within ourselves of those whom we love, the betrayals, the lies, and that is with what we carry within us. And so, as we begin this conversation about mercy in the 21st century, my conversation will be focused on the Holy Father, with whom I have had the pleasure and honor to serve since April of last year. You can ask all the questions you want at the Q&A about what it's like to hang out with the Pope every now and then, because it is a lot of fun. But I'd like to start, again, more of the theological side of things. First, the Holy Father and mercy. Pope Francis and mercy. He has a phrase that he has been using ever since he was Archbishop of Buenos Aires, and even before that. We have a collection of all of the homilies that he used to preach at the cathedral. And one little particular phrase is tocar la carne de Cristo, to touch the flesh of Christ. Now think about that for a second. To touch the flesh of Christ. That's not, an idea. That's not, a beautiful thought. That's an invitation into relationship with something that is incarnate. And with that, I'd like to share with you one thing which is in theology we call it a hermeneutical key. Basically the key to understanding Pope Francis. If you hear any of his speeches, if you hear anything that he has to say, you have to keep this in mind. This is sort of like Pope Francis 101, Padre Jorge 101. He prefers the title Padre Jorge rather than Your Holiness, and even when he was Archbishop of Buenos Aires and the Cardinal, he asked that his priest keep referring to him as Padre Jorge. Priest is his primary identity, Father. And so the key is this: la realidad es más grande que las ideas. Reality is greater than ideas. So before we go deep into this deep theological topic of mercy, I'd like to keep that as a fundamental key to understanding where he's coming from. Reality is greater than ideas. I don't know about you, but that should really shock you in one way, right? It's like, come on, because all of us, we live in the 21st century, and that's part of this talk. Part of the 21st century has been a century, and really going back to the 20th, in which ideas reigned. It was ideology that gave us the different world wars. It has been ideology that continues to separate our nation. Most right now among politics, right? So you have to take one side or the other, and there really is no middle ground because it's not efficient to be part of the middle ground. You have to be either on one side, either Republican or Democrat. That's it. And so those ideologies are very, very strong within our nation. So the unique contribution that the Holy Father brings to our century is by using as a starting point real life experience rather than competing ideas. Does that make sense? I got everybody. I know some of you guys had maybe a few Biden Kugels. All right, okay. All right. So that's that. If you don't get that, you're going to just be lost the rest of the talk. All right. So, in other words, the Holy Father offers us a different epistemology, a different way of understanding, a different approach to how we know and learn, or better, how we are informed. He is calling our generation to be more authentic in our way of knowing and learning. He is challenging us about the way in which we become informed. Reality, real experience. I know that it's very common, especially for those of us who are really in love with technology. We can know anything we want to know without having to ask anybody. We can just ask Siri or Google, or we can go, actually the number one search engine today is actually YouTube, for anything you want to know. It's no longer people don't want to read anymore, so people watch videos about how to do things or historical facts that somebody has placed, in Patagonia or something. So, knowing the idea, you can get through a book, you can get through Google, you can get, through any other medium. But real experience demands a personal connection, a personal relationship, and the willingness to encounter the other. And that's another theme of the Holy Father, encounter. You don't encounter an idea, you encounter a person, a whole person with our own histories, with our own wounds, with our own joys, with our own sufferings, with our own loneliness, with everything. That is what the Holy Father is challenging our generation, to say, stop Googling stuff and start talking to another human being. And that should challenge us, because it is way more comfortable to go Google something than to ask somebody, to be honest with you. Even for me. So he wants us to have a different perspective on life. And rather than seeing it from the 30,000 feet level of ideas, he challenges you and me and our generation to experience the life of everyday real people. Crazy, huh? Crazy. Because everyday real people don't make the headlines. But the premise of Christianity is one in which God, who had no need of anything, in his infinite mercy, decides to send in the fullness of time, according to the book of John, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. The Word, God, the God who created the universe, the world, you, me, thought about everything that exists within our planet, about the uniqueness of who you are within your personality, the parents that you did not choose, the work where you get to go to work, the place where you get to go to work, the schools where you learn. That God decided to become incarnate, flesh, ordinary, real, not an idea. You see, for generations, historians tell us that going back to the Babylonian times, the earliest records of history that we have available to humanity, men and women like you and I have always longed for God, that which is other, that which is larger than ourselves. And yet, in that desire, that Augustine says, Lord, our hearts are restless until they rest in you, that famous phrase from Augustine becomes real. When that God of ideas, really from Babylonian times, all the way to the times of the Old Testament, what happened? God had sent prophets who talked, about who God was. Moses talked about his experience, with the Ten Commandments. But men and women were looking for God in what God had created. And that's part of, the Christianity's criticism of really finding God within nature, right? If Jesus had not come, then go ahead, look for God in the trees. Because technically, the trees are a reflection of God's creative being. But God, just a minor detail, he did, in looking at the human condition, he decided to send his only son. And he did not send him as an idea, but he sent him as a person. That Christmas thing that we do every year? That's what we celebrate, the mystery of the incarnation. What Pope Francis wants to do is to return us to that point where the God who created everything becomes one of us, and therefore, out of everything that has been created within the world, that which most likely reflects who God is humanity. For, as we remember in the book of Genesis, God says at the beginning, right? He created the world, and God said it was... Come on. All right. And then God created the light, and he found it to be good. And then he created the animals, he created everything, and he found it to be good. But then when it came to the creation of humanity, he said, and it's very interesting, it's a minor little subtle thing in the book of Genesis, in which he says, let us make men and women in our image and likeness. Fascinating. That little subtle thing. Who is us? The Trinity is what we believe. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And there is the hermeneutic key to understanding humanity, by the way. If you ever want to understand humanity, that's it. We have been made in the image and likeness of God. God who is a communion of persons. God who is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And therefore, since it's a community, and you and I have been made in that image and likeness, we can only be fully ourselves. We can only be fully happy. We can only be fully joyful. We can only be the best when we are in communion with each other. You will not find in anything that has been created the same connection as you can within another human being. It's as simple as that. So he says, go to ordinary life, to ordinary human beings, and encounter them. In The Joy of the Gospel, he tells us specifically that ideas, ideological movements, cannot be disconnected from reality. The two must always be in dialogue. He is concerned that in a century which has been dominated by the reduction of the human person to his or her beliefs, in our generation, that we get stuck in the realm of pure ideas. And that is what defines us. ideology, whether political or philosophical or theological. And thus, the moment that I see you as, let's say we engage in a conversation about whatever, politics or whatever, then I'm going to put you in a box, in the box of that ideology. And now I have to be defensive, because if you're saying something that I don't believe or that I don't agree with, then I'm going to fight you on it, right? And we're just going to out-argue each other. Whoever has the highest IQ or has had more history or has done more studies, then that person will win the argument. But at the end of the day, what? You just get this sort of feeling that you have had a little bit more than the other. So, ideas do not call us into action. Ideas call us into blabber. That's what they do. It's nice. I don't want to put them all down. We need them. But they need to be in dialogue with the person. In the United States, in our culture, we can become quite content. In my world, where I have just recently come from Kellogg, we're so happy, to quote statistics. And now we're data-driven. And so we sift and interpret data, and we categorize populations, all the while remaining indifferent to and unaware of the real people behind those ideas and those statistics. To paraphrase the Holy Father, this approach for humanity is a dead end. For it only creates, and I quote him, ethical systems that are empty of kindness. Think about that for a second. And it carries on intellectual discourse that is empty of wisdom. In our own Catholic tradition, we come to face the idea of mercy, this idea of forgiveness, which is a very deep idea. But before I go in there, I'd like to just do a little quick historical, and this is going to be more a conversation because I don't have all the facts, and I think there's more wisdom in the room than just in this head. So, who founded this country, the United States? Lots of people. The founding fathers. Let's start with the founding fathers. Great. So they founded it. Why did they found this country? What was this country founded?
Break from England?
They were looking for religious freedom. From who? From England, right? From the British Crown. Good. What was the name of the king? George III, I think. They were trying to get away from him. Okay. So, and the idea of a system, and this idea that we have, that the legal system that we have created, this, which has given us a lot of great things, by the way. I don't want to demonize it. It has given us rights. It has given us, the Constitution. It's a great blessing. But one of the other things is that we have become based upon that system, which goes back to George III, and it goes back to the Crown, which goes back to, remember what happened in England a few centuries earlier, before George III? Henry VIII. Do you remember that? Yeah. So what happened with Henry VIII?
Couldn't have any kids.
Made himself the authority of the church, right? He didn't have any kids. Yeah, there's other facts. True. So let's Google that. All right. So we go back into this very, very separated system, and we have basically if we trace the roots, we have a legalistic system, a system of rights. And in a legalistic system, it creates a legalistic society, which has a lot of great things to give us. We know what's right and what's wrong, and we as a society look down upon, people who do things that are not in the law, right? And then people who do things that are in the law and they're illegal, we, applaud them, right? And we give them medals at the White House. Now, people look up. You said White House. That's what we do as a society. We reward those who are legally binding people, right? And we look with eyes of disgust upon those who break the law. There's something greater than the law here. That's in the gospel somewhere, right? Yes. That gospel thing. It really gets against my nationalism. But honestly, it does. Jesus, I tell you, he's trouble. He's trouble. So we become so focused in our legal system that often it is that legal system that defines ethics and defines morality and defines what's right and what's wrong. And the moment that I basically close down myself to a legal system and I judge you only through a legal filter, then you're valued depending upon that filter. And that is what's being questioned here. And I'm sure we have a few lawyers in the crowd, and that's great. God bless you with what you do. It's not. I have a lot of great lawyer friends who are probably going to help me after this talk. So we have grown up in a legalistic system. And so for us to hear the word mercy as a culture, it's very, very tough. And I tell you, as I have gotten the chance to travel around the world since I started doing this job, just how difficult Americans wrestle with Pope Francis, right, and his message. You may not, our generation may not. You know, we're the millennial generation. We're the people who wants justice for everybody. And so we're cool with that. But talk to mom and dad and grandpa and grandma, right? And they might say, who is this guy? What is he saying? Where did they get him from? These Latin Americans. They may say that. I don't know. But so we go from a legal system, we go from a legal culture, and now we're faced with our own Catholic tradition, which really challenges our nationalism. Not only here, by the way, but in every country. And so we first hear this. We have to sort of try to wrestle with philosophy in trying to make justice and mercy kiss. And so first let's explore justice. What's justice? Anybody just give me your definition of justice?
To give each their due.
To give each their due.
To be fair.
To be fair. What else?
Recollection of truth. The recollection of truth.
A something of truth? Recollection of truth. All right, so the most basic thing, so you have a law that has been proclaimed, right? That is promulgated, and most people would understand what that's all about. Ask a lawyer if that's true. And so, in order for a law, philosophy tells us that in order for a law to be valid, respected by a people, it has to be promulgated, it has to be understood, etc. Now, when it's time to make a judgment on whether somebody has really, follow the law or not, what happens? What do? We have a judge, right? And then we have two parties, one for it, the other one against it. Now, that system is a system upon which we function every day. When we are looking at a stop sign, we're thinking, like, oh, it's already ingrained within us. That means stop. No one is really going to come out in front of your car and say, stop. Right? No, but you know that. We're already programmed that way. Now, justice. God is a God of justice. In the church, since the Middle Ages, has really focused on this part. And the Holy Father, in that time it was John the 23rd, when he called the Second Vatican Council, along with church leaders from all over the world in the 1960s, he thought that it was a time for an aggiornamento, an updating, of going from this era where the church was basically based upon this legal system. If you look at all the conciliar documents, they all ended with what at the end? Any church people here? With anathemas. If you don't do this, anathema, sit. And it wasn't a dog, right? That was not the name of the dog. It was basically, you're out of the church. You're excommunicated. If you don't do this, and it was a list. It was the way that the church functioned going back to the Middle Ages. We had the councils who said, if you don't follow this rule, you're excommunicated. And the Second Vatican Council is the first one to not have any anathemas at the end. And I remember, I thought I had the quotation here, when John the 23rd opened the council, he said this: now, the bride of Christ wishes to use the medicine of mercy rather than taking up the arms of severity. The Catholic Church, as she holds high the torch of the Catholic truth at this ecumenical council, wants to show herself a loving mother to all, patient, kind, moved by compassion and goodness towards her separated children. What a different tone. What a different way of looking into ecclesiology, the church. when Paul VI closed the Second Vatican Council, he said this: "Brothers, we prefer to point out how charity has been the principal religious feature of this council. The old story of the Good Samaritan has been the model of the spirituality of the council. A wave of affection and admiration flowed from the council over the modern world of humanity. Errors were condemned, indeed, because charity demanded this no less than did truth. But for individuals themselves, there was only admonition, respect, and love. Instead of depressing diagnoses, encouraging remedies. Instead of direful predictions, messages of trust issued from the council to the present-day world. The modern world's values were not only respected, but honored. Its efforts approved, its aspirations purified and blessed. Another point we must stress is this: all this rich teaching is channeled in one direction: the service of mankind of every condition, in every weakness and need." Friends, something happened in the 60s in the church when the church fathers gathered at the Second Vatican Council. And so it changed the direction of the church and our approach to the church. It did not change our beliefs in who Jesus is. It did not change the core of the tradition. It did not change, the essence of the church. What it did change was the way that we are to engage with the world. And then after the council, something else happened, specifically in countries like ours. And believe me, it's not just in countries like the United States. Recently, I was in Finland and in Norway. I was in France and also in Germany. And it also happened there. And so in similar countries, what ended up happening was that we've had sort of a return, we can say, that to this belief, and now I'm generalizing, this is not everywhere, in every diocese, but we went into, well, if we basically tell people the rules, then they're going to obey, right? And even though when the council back in the 60s said, we're going to stop doing that, and now Pope Francis comes in, right, and says, we have to return. We have to return to the encounter. So, we believe in our own tradition. St. Thomas Aquinas, the angelic doctor, he says that God's mercy is not a sign of weakness, but rather it is a sign of His omnipotence. Think about that for a second. God's mercy is not a sign of weakness, but rather the mark of His omnipotence. Justice is the premise that I give my due, just as you said at the beginning, right? Each one receives their due. Right? And so if I do this, then the law says that I merit that. Right? If somebody hurts or steals, then the society judges for that person to receive the just punishment for that. Mercy is larger than justice. See, mercy is granting forgiveness to someone who is undeserving of that forgiveness. Let me say that again. Mercy is one step beyond justice. It is granting forgiveness to someone who doesn't deserve it. Does any of us deserve God's mercy? God, I'm so good. I got an MBA from Kellogg. Come on. Come on. Grant me your forgiveness. No. Titles don't matter. What matters is the human heart. And what matters is that we have a loving God. The Psalms speak about this. The Psalm 136, the refrain repeats over and over, "For His mercy endures forever. For His mercy endures forever. Let the house of Israel say, His mercy endureth forever. Let the house of Aaron say, His mercy endures forever. Let the house," and it goes on and on and on. "His mercy endures forever." Why? Because the Israelites knew. They knew God's mercy. For what had happened? Moses leaves them alone for a few, moments to go pray up in the mountain. What do? First they're like, "He got us out of Egypt. He got us out of Egypt. We're so happy." And then Moses leaves them to go pray. And what do they do? "Oh, we're hungry. Oh, come on. This sucks being here in the desert." So what do? They put all their belongings together, the gold belongings, and what do? They create a golden calf, and they begin to worship it, right? And then Moses comes on and he's like, what the heck, guys? Like, this guy just got us out of Babylon, from being slaves, and here you are, like, I just went to pray, and now you've created a golden calf, and now you're worshiping this thing? And so the Israelites knew when they wrote Psalm 136, for his mercy endures forever, for only a merciful God would be able to forgive such an offense. The parables in the New Testament. Jesus reveals the nature of God as a father who never gives up until he has forgiven the wrong and overcome rejection with compassion and mercy. We know these parables well. Specifically the three. Which ones are the three? Come on, I'm going to test you now because I'm losing you. Some of you. Some of you are like so, and some of you are like the alcohol's kicking in. The prodigal son, right? That's the father with the two sons.
Treasure in the field.
Oh, okay, now I better give you the answers. All right. The lost sheep is the other one, right? And the lost coin. In these parables, God is always presented as full of joy, especially when he forgives. In them we find the core of the gospel and of our faith, because mercy is presented as a force that overcomes everything, filling the heart with love and bringing consolation through pardon. I don't know about you, but some of the best confessions that I have had as a priest listening, now I'm telling you the other side. I'm not going to tell you who told me this, but have been those moments of reconciliation with God. And often it's really been interesting. I've only been a priest for 5 years, but in these 5 years, as I hear the amount of confessions, I find that many people are carrying the weight of having offended somebody else, and they feel quite comfortable coming to me as the confessor and saying, Father, I really feel bad. I insulted, Christina. And so I also insulted Father Ken and Father Rex and Flo and, everybody else here at St. Clement. And I always ask them, have you asked them for forgiveness? And always their face is like, no. But I want God to forgive me. And then I'm very challenging. I got to tell you, I must confess. I say to them, leave your offering here and go reconcile yourself with your brother. And then come back and seek God's forgiveness. That's very tough. It's a tough penance. And so, but once they do that, the joy that takes over the person's heart is really noticeable. And so we learn from this Christian tradition, and we know this idea of mercy through the sacred scriptures. It's been part of our tradition. Now, the Holy Father, where does he get this idea of mercy? As I said to you, reality is really larger than just ideas. And for him, it started when he was a young man. Like you and I, he was ready to go to a party in Buenos Aires. Yes, it is part of his historical biography of Pope Francis that he was a bouncer at a club, but he was a bouncer at a club, not the type of club that we go to, okay? Right? Not the type of bouncers that we know, right? It was a tango club in Buenos Aires, and that's what he used to do. He was partying it up in Buenos Aires, and on his way to one of the parties with his friends, he saw the Church of St. Joseph of Miraflores was open. And there was an old priest, well, not old for him at that time, but there was a priest in the confessional. And he waited. And then he went into the confessional and had the most amazing experience through reconciliation and through forgiveness. So much so that it was that moment, instead of going to the party, he just stayed in the church until the church closed. Something supernatural happened with the meeting of the natural. He experienced the forgiveness and what he calls the loving face of Jesus in that confessor that changed the direction of his life forever as a young man. That's when he started with his vocation and trying to figure out whether he was called to be a Jesuit, etc. To the point that later he was a priest, and this priest who had listened to his confession died. And he showed up, in Buenos Aires they do these velatorios, the funeral. and they had the body of the priest ready. And so before everybody arrived, they told the priest to come early. So he decided, he was already a priest, and he decided to come a little bit earlier to the funeral of this priest who had heard his confession. And he goes up to the casket to say his prayers to his beloved confessor, through whom he experienced the loving mercy of God. And the man was already dead. And it's typical in our Catholic world, we put a rosary around priest's hands, right? And what he did in that very moment, and he confessed it just last year, so I'm happy to share that with you. He snatched the cross from the rosary. And in that moment, he made a prayer to God, saying, Lord, make me half as merciful as this priest. And that little cross from that casket has been in his pocket ever since that moment. Reality is greater than ideas. It started there with a confession. It started with a repentant heart. It started with a priest who was the loving face of Jesus. And later when he became bishop, auxiliary bishop of Buenos Aires, and later cardinal, he kept the same motto. Bishops get to pick a motto, something that it's kind of like their tagline, their brand, if you want to put it that way, in marketing terms. So what's their brand? So he chose the brand that he has continued to have. So now as Pope, we see his motto, and right under it, there's some letters in Latin, right? Does anybody know what it says? It's very important. Such a little thing, but very, very important. No one dares. Miserando atque eligendo. Having seen him with the gaze of mercy, he chose him. He elected him. It is deep. This goes back, years. This is not just a little thing that this man, all of a sudden, is like, a branding option for the Roman Catholic Church in 2015 would be a great thing about, mercy and forgiveness, and, because this message we can really sell in Europe, and we can look into, the statistics of Asia and Latin America. It's really growing. So this would really work. So let's just choose that. No, that's not how it works. I don't think any of our biggest firms in New York and marketing firms would ever be able to come up with such a thing. He took it from St. Bede the Venerable, in which he says it comes from that story of Jesus choosing Matthew. And it says, Jesus therefore saw the publican, and seeing him with eyes of mercy, he chose him and said to him, follow me. But isn't that the greatest thing for all of us? Isn't that really what our faith says about each one of us, that none of us really have it all together, that we are all broken men and women who are in need of mercy, from God's mercy, from my mother's mercy, from my brother's mercy, from everybody else's mercy? Isn't that really who we are? And that having looked at us with eyes of mercy, because to be honest with you, most of the time, I don't look at people with eyes of mercy. Most of the time, my MO is to look at people with eyes of judgment, because that's what I have been trained to do since I was a child, that I have to use everything that I know, philosophy, theology, history, and I analyze you, and then I judge you, and I make a judgment, and depending upon my judgment of you, that's how I'm going to treat you, Rich. And that's how I treated you here at St. Clement. But how different it is to be invited and to look into somebody else with the eyes of mercy, with the eyes of compassion, with the eyes of our God, who looks into every human being, not because of the function, not because of the title, not because of where they go to school or where they go to church, not because of who they're with, but rather because they are loved intimately by God. And so, this year, the Holy Father has proclaimed that this year, beginning on December the 8th, all the way through November 20th of 2016, it will be the Jubilee year, the extraordinary year. And you can Google that, because it's a long story for me to tell you what a Jubilee year is right now. But it will be proclaimed, he already proclaimed it, and it begins December the 8th. Our salvation depends on mercy. None of us, I don't care how good you are, how bright you are, where you go to school, what title you have, I don't care who you are. Your salvation depends on God's mercy. My salvation depends on God's mercy because I am not good enough. He is God and I am not.
That's right.
The Word reveals the very mystery of the Holy Trinity. This ultimate act and supreme act of mercy in which God, in His infinite love for you and for me, has decided to come, to become human, to take your sins and mine upon His shoulders and provide for us salvation as a gift. Mercy is the ultimate and supreme act by which God comes to meet you and me. Mercy is the fundamental law that dwells within the heart of every person who looks sincerely into the eyes of his brother or his sister in the path of life. Mercy is the bridge that connects God, man, women, opening our hearts to the hope of being loved forever, despite our sinfulness, despite what we do. It is not that God loves you because of what you do. It is not that God loves you because of who you are. It is not that God loves you because of the title that you have. But God loves you because of who He is. A God of love and mercy and compassion. And it is true that the church often fails to show you that God, to show you that face. It is true that it's easier for me to go on my MO as a priest as I take this thing off and to just go out there and judge you as you come into my church. As I've had a long day after celebrating so many masses and you come to me, because your boyfriend dumped you. And to be honest, that's not the most important thing for me at that moment. And there's plenty of us, who are just tired, like any other human being, and we treat you like that. And we should have shown you, that face of mercy that was shown to young Jorge Mario Bergoglio in Argentina. And we don't do that. It is true that ministers who work within the church, often it becomes for them a thing of like honor in the midst of the community, right? That I'm the extraordinary minister of the Eucharist, and so I look good on Sunday up there, or I read, or I do whatever. I'm not bashing the people who do this. I love what you do. Thank you so much for doing it. But there's people who don't, who have turned us away. I remember when I was here, St. Clement taught me so many lessons about mercy and forgiveness, and also about personal stupidity. I remember one day I was, one of my pet peeves was, when I'm preaching, anything, that moves, it just like takes me out of the zone, and I'm lost. And it was Christmas Mass. And of course, I had worked an entire week and a half on my sermon, and so I'm ready to deliver it. And in the middle of my sermon, this lady showed up and was just like click, 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 and I'm like, oh my God, I'm gonna lose it. I'll lose it right now. And at the end of Mass, I just kept dwelling on that, right? I kept dwelling on this lady interrupting me. How dare she? I mean, I had worked so hard for this. And then at the end of Mass, I did say, I'm really sorry, but you were extremely disruptive during the Mass, during the time that I was preaching. I could no longer concentrate on the message that I had prepared. And I know it's Christmas, but here's the schedule for next year. Yeah. Not so good. So the lady looked to me and said, Father, I am so sorry that I disrupted you, during your sermon. But the reason why I'm late is because I have my son at Children's Memorial Hospital, which used to be right there. And I came, Father, it's Christmas. And I wanted to pray for my son, and ask baby Jesus to be with us because his father left us. And I'm there alone. So I noticed that the lights were on and that the church was going on, and I decided to come in. Never forgot the lesson. And now when people are late to church, I know that they could be in the same situation as that lady. And so I've learned it wasn't an idea, it was reality. And so with that, I think we're way over time. Aren't we, Christina? Are we good? What do we do? Close? Gosh, okay, I had so many other things to say. But I speak for my job in Rome, so that's what I do. I talk in front of the media, so I have a lot more stuff. So with that, I think, what are we going to do? So let me just close with that. I think I want to close with that. No, let me close with this. La misericordia cambia el mundo, hace el mundo menos frío y más justo. El rostro de Dios es el rostro de la misericordia, que siempre tiene paciencia. Dios nunca se cansa de perdonarnos. El problema es que nosotros nos cansamos de pedirle perdón. No nos cansemos nunca. Él es el Padre amoroso que siempre perdona, que tiene misericordia con nosotros. Mercy has the potential to change the world. It makes our world less cold and more just. The face of God is the face of mercy, which is always patient. God never tires of forgiving us. The problem is that we get tired of asking for forgiveness. Never let us get tired. He is the loving Father that always forgives us, that has mercy with each and every one of us. And I close with this. If you, in your own life, encounter this sort of mercy, being forgiven, and to know that in your gut and in your heart that you have been forgiven, we are to go and first encounter God. If you and God can't get along, for whatever reason, that's pretty tough. I mean, forget about you being able to forgive another human being, right? If you and God just don't have it together, we got to work on that one first. That's fundamental, the relationship with God. If that one's broken, forget about being able to have forgiveness. So I would call it with this, and I'll leave you with this. 3 moments of encounter. If you forget everything else, remember this. 3 moments of encounter. The first is the encounter with God. Through prayer, through the sacraments, through the church, through what we do in church, in the liturgy. The encounter with God in which we experience forgiveness, specifically the sacrament of reconciliation. If you have not been to confession, come right over. On 44th in California, I listen to confessions from 5 p.m. To 6 p.m. on Mondays, and right after Mass, from 8:30 a.m. until the last person is done, and we get a lot of people. But Father Rex will also be taking your confessions, and Father Ken and the others, and Father Wojciech. Well, I don't know Father Peter; he's always too busy. But the first is the encounter with God. Once we have had that encounter with God, the second is the encounter with the community, right? With those who are Christian, with those who are Catholic, as we encounter them with our own family, the internal, I would say, encounter. From God, having been forgiven, I turn to my family. Internally, those who God gave me naturally. And then the third encounter is with others who are not my family, who are not my friends, showing them mercy. Start with that, finding mercy within God, mercy to your family, and mercy to others. All right, I think I'm done.